about it, but you didn't
Never
do them?
saw it.
Oh, you never did them?
No.
Okay. Does anybody else want to do that, or what the hell is it? What am I talking about? Oh, my nephew has not done any variation, but
5 elements. I heard about it, don't know. It's something I watched, and now I can't remember what it was.
it's yeah. And this is in old Chinese philosophy and ways of trying to sort out the world, and then it made it into Japan. There's different forms of it, and it's probably most famous in martial arts circles with Miyamoto Musashi's book of 5 rings, which are the 5 basic elemental forms, is what he structured that around. And in that sort of traditional thinking, you have 5 elements or 5 constituent parts of reality. So you just think 5 categories. And I've always seen that for years as being kind of esoteric, or philosophic, or metaphorical, or whatever. And it can be, and there are people that interpret it that way. There's whole martial arts systems that organize themselves traditionally around the 5 elements or the 5 big ideas. And sometimes it seems kind of goofy to me, and so I didn't know what to make of it. For the first time this past year, I ran across actual physical reference points of what they were talking about in terms of Aikido, from a guy who was a Uchideshi with Ushiba. And it started out with earth, and earth is just, if you think about this palmar surface, this flat palm, and how we deliver energy by transferring body weight from one person to another. We have this steady line of energy coming from the earth through our palm, and it becomes most effective at the point that the palm becomes horizontal. So whatever you're pushing, if I'm pushing his face, it's power, 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 power. If he falls away from it, if it were to fall down, it would be smashing down. Or when you find yourself in positions, say here, right, or here. When the palmar surface is delivering energy, that was Ushiba defined that as earth. He said you're doing earth things, you're tying it to the earth. And I think of it as body dropping. So when you're loading body weight into him, and your hand hits him, and you bridged in and you drop through his center, you're really doing earth-oriented things. Cool. And we do a lot of that. That's a lot of the system coming out of straight Tomiki Aikido. Balance break, boom, flat palms. You know, harken back, flat palms again. Lots of this surface gets involved, so it's very easy to relate to. And he said, yeah, and when you do this edge, like from the pinky down the ulna, the edge going all the way down the arm, it's Tegatana. So there's a whole bunch of the Aikido world that's treating this like a sword. Tegatana is just a hand sword or an arm sword. That's fire, and fire tends to deliver energy out and up and in diagonal lines. And it has sort of a cutting feel. You touch them and it's very sharp. It has a sharp kind of slicing quality. So I think probably some people still feel this a lot when they do, in our system of training, when they're doing like a gate knocking. Cut across and then they cut through, and this thing acts like a slicing mechanism. It's not the only way to throw that, but it's a popular way a lot of people have. But it has this quality of affecting it, and it's a lot more horizontally driven, and even up. So if you see things that are shearing up and then shearing down, like chopping up, chopping down, or cutting up, cutting down, those kind of actions. In the higher kata, you run into it again, where you start seeing these edges come into play. Yan kata, for instance, the very first one, boom, you have this elemental form happening. You say, wow, it works great in yan kata right here. Well, what about number 1 release? How about right there? Yeah, it's the same thing on the outside. So I started cooking and saying, well, you could apply these in different places that weren't obvious from what the katas and the stuff was laying on. The third element he talked about was water. And if you think about, you're holding a pitcher of water and you're turning it out, it's this surface where you would be holding something between the thumb and forefinger. And the way the wrist interacts and the radius and ulna interact, and the elbow and shoulder, and if you're dumping stuff out, dumping it out of the car this way, dumping it out of the right? That you have these sort of turning actions, and those turning actions get all about curves. And so we do a lot of Aikido things that have these curving qualities to them, where you're capturing and you're yoking and twisting and turning, working in this sort of surface. And those things are really great at affecting a surface that becomes vertical. So if I'm grasping between the thumb and forefinger out here and twisting on this, it has very little. But once this becomes a vertical surface, the twist starts really affecting his body fairly dramatically. You can grasp a horizontal surface like this and you can affect it, but you grasp a vertical surface and you affect it a lot. So pretty much anything you get a hold of that gets vertical, like this is vertical, you're going to have a whole lot more affect than if it's happening out here or happening here. Cool? And water just has this quality of working on the vertical plane much more effectively than on the horizontal plane. And it works in these curves. And the footwork and isometrics for it tends to be a fluid sort of moving dynamic like that. Cool? Cool. And those are the first three to fool with, really. And I suggest you just take whatever, favorite techniques, whatever you like to do, and see if you can find applications in them or moments in them where a particular way of delivering energy in a particular difference might accentuate something for you. And you find different ways of going about things you know how to do already, but you might get results you've never seen before. So, particularly for me, there were things dealing with this vertical surface in water that I've never really messed with before. That's kind of interesting to me. So, that's the starting point. That was the stuff that was described by the Uchideshi fellow, Gleason, who had heard that from Ueshiba. I thought, wow, actual physical parameters tied to those ideas that I've read about all these years, but I'd never heard anything that was tying it down to something as basic as a physical principle of delivery of energy. And that's what I started with. Cool? So I'd suggest starting with those three. Then the last two are things I just sort of hypothesized on my own that may or may not have anything to do with what it was in anybody else's head, but that there's a situation what they call wind, or they call air, or it's also been referred to as heaven, where you have clouds and lightning, and it's all based on just points of contact, touch, 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 where everything's just momentary, like you're just hitting me with little lightning bolts all over it, and it can be just a little light touch, or it can be with more percussion, if you want, you can make it into a real kind of mean thing if you like, but basically you're just limiting the duration of contact. That as he's delivering energy to you, you deliver it to him, and you don't give him anything to stabilize back again. His body just gets a signal, but no long-term relationship to hang on to. And as he's dealing with this signal and recovering from it, you give him a new signal, and you give him a new signal, and you give him a new signal, and you just continually operate throughout his system. And you can conceptualize a given technique just with that as well. So you say, I think I'll do Kota Taoshi. You say, I'm doing a swing through release and Kota Taoshi. Well, that seems like earth. What's it feel like when you do the same damn thing, and now it's a sort of edge? It's a little different. Or it gets a little different directionality. Different. You start curving things and say, now I'll do it with a little, with this curve. And the curve, then this flat surface, not so cool. So when I go curving, and then it gets horizontal, again, it gets to be very powerful. Wow, you just hold that thing like it's nothing, all right? So what's the wind thing? Yeah, you're dancing around for you. Really weird stuff. Starting with that as a basis. And the last one was void in Musashi. It's just the book of emptiness. And that's where the thing's coming at you, and you just ain't there. Something's there that messes with you. It's coming for this, and it's not where it was. It's up here instead. And so the targeting problem becomes what he's dealing with. He's here, he's not here, he's here, it's not here, it's here. And you're affecting his eyes, you're affecting his targeting, you're affecting the reflexes, but you're not doing it with contact. You're doing it with space. Cool? And that's the model I started with. Any questions? All right, all right. Well, I suggest experimenting with them and see if it's useful to you. And if it's not, get rid of it. I mean, it's just an idea. It might be interesting. You might find interesting things about it. You might not. Cool. So that's what that is. Anything else that you guys feel like that? Talk. Joe? You want to do some Joe work? Cool. What do you want to do with it, Joe?
I was just anything.
Okay. You want to throw people with it or have them attack you with it and you take it away from them? Or what do you feel like?